All right, everybody, welcome back to a brand new video here on the second channel. And today we're going to be looking at 12 brand new decks from Surging Sparks that you can build tomorrow when the set does go live on Pokemon TCG Live. Yeah, the set comes out on Thursday tomorrow, and I'm super excited. And of course, if you want to build any of these decks for yourself, hopefully this video does help you out. We got a bunch of different archetypes here using some of the brand new EX cards from this new set. I want to give a shout out to Pokemon and Limitless for having the results from the City Leagues that I was able to find playable decks from these new EXs that have performed pretty well at these tournaments, and some of these decks have won gym battles or won or got like top 8 at a City League, so I want to leave a link to those down below if you want to go check them out for yourself. If you're new to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 18,000 subscribers. Check out the sponsors down below too if you're going to get any Surging Sparks codes tomorrow. Get them over at Card Cavern and use code LEF at the checkout. And without further ado, let's get into these deck lists. All right, I wanted to start things off with the mascot of the set, Pikachu EX. Now, Pikachu EX does have that attack that could do 300 damage, but you do need 3 different types of energy on it in order to do the attack. Now, there are different ways you could play it with like Magneton or within Lost Box, but a really cool way that actually won a City League in Japan is to play Pikachu EX with Blissey. So the idea behind the deck is since Pikachu is a Terra Pokemon, you could have it in play and you can immediately activate the Glass Trumpet item card. So you can Glass Trumpet 2 energy from the discard pile onto your Blissey, and then you can use Blissey's ability to move an energy from the Blissey to your Pikachu. So you can have 2 Blissey in play, and you can Glass Trumpet 2 energy into play. You can Blissey the 2 energy onto your Pikachu EX, and then chain Pikachu's attack over and over again with the help of Glass Trumpet. You can also play something like the Turbo Energize in the deck to help get energy in play. You could play Power Glass to also help fuel Pikachu's attack cost. And this deck definitely looks pretty cool. It's kind of like the Galvantula Blissey deck where you're trying to chain that item lock attack every turn, but instead in this case, you're trying to chain Pikachu's big 300 damage attack every single turn. This list did win a City League in Japan, so it does have a decent result behind it, and this could be the best way to actually attack with Pikachu EX. It might be good in Lost Box too. I'm not including Lost Box in this video, but I think Pikachu Blissey definitely looks really strong, and it could be a fun deck, so definitely I'm excited to try this deck out. And like I said, this could be the best way to play Pikachu EX. Tagiri has a wild Terra attack here. It has that Terra attack where you can look at the top 10 cards of your deck and put any number of Pokemon you find there onto your bench. Now, I got this built here from Pokemon that did do well at a gym battle, and the idea of the deck is basically use Tagiri's attack, right? You power it up through Sparkling Crystal and Crispin, and then you use it and you put a bunch of Pokemon to play. Now, this deck is playing a ton of different Pokemon to put into play via Tagiri. Of course, we have Pidgeot EX being a pretty good partner. Being able to put a Pidgeot EX into play for free with Tagiri's attack is pretty cool. Of course, it also plays Dusknoir, which you can also put into play. Dusknoir obviously using that really strong ability. And then we have Dragapult and Charizard as 2 of your main attackers in the deck. Charizard being a really strong late game attacker. Dragapult can be pretty good in the early game to spread some damage. Also, playing the Farigiraf in the deck, this will help against Raging Bolt. If you put Farigiraf into play against Raging Bolt, I mean, essentially the Raging Bolt will not be able to do any damage to you apart from trying to use Slitherwing. And if you can deal with their Slitherwing immediately with Farigiraf, well, how's the Raging Bolt deck going to deal with you? It also has Palkia V-Star in the deck, which can use Star Portal if you ever want that V-Star power alongside playing the Radiant Greninja, and as a hydreigon EX in the deck for another big attacker. Since you're already playing Sparkling Crystal, it makes sense to play these 3 or even 4 different Terra-type Pokemon in the deck. It is a fun little toolbox deck. I don't think Tagiri is like anything insane or super competitive, but it's a really fun archetype to try out nonetheless, because just being able to put a bunch of different random Pokemon to play can be really cool. And if you can kind of, have results like this with this type of deck, I mean, this could be pretty interesting, and definitely is a deck that is going to be a lot of fun. Just being able to put a bunch of Stage 2s into play immediately sounds kind of sick, and I'm definitely excited to give Tagiri EX a try. One of the more annoying new Pokemon to come out from Surging Sparks is the new Milotic. And Milotic has been doing pretty good in Japan City Leagues just because of its ability. Being immune to Terra Pokemon means you can pair it with some other annoying wall Pokemon. Of course, like Cornerstone Ogerpon EX, which is a pretty good wall in it itself. We also got the Mimikyu, which is another good wall Pokemon. Cornerstone and Mimikyu can kind of offset the weakness Milotic has to any Terra decks having extra Pokemon that are not Terra Pokemon that happen to be good attackers. Something like a Pidgeot EX, for example, can be annoying. Now, this deck did win a City League here. This exact list did win a City League in Japan. It also plays Palkia. Palkia can be a really good attacker to deal with threats that can touch the Milotic. And also, it does power up Milotic via Star Portal. Also plays Gastrodon in the deck, which can really slow the opponent down if they're playing Pidgeot or Dusknoir or something as ways to deal with the Milotic. Also plays a 2/2 Noivern. Noivern is very important in this format to deal with Raging Bolt EX. Raging Bolt can be beaten through Mimikyu, obviously, but if it is is going to be a little bit harder to deal with because they have the Slither Wing. You can at least use Noivern to also try to wall them out via its attack. So this deck is in a very annoying wall deck and kind of can answer like everything in the format. The big basics, the Terra heavy decks, and of course has answers to decks full of abilities and Pokemon V. Definitely Milotic will be a very annoying card to play against, and if you're playing a deck that can't really answer the Milotic, I mean, you might want to consider putting some text in your deck like a Canceling Clone or something in order to make Milotic less of a threat to your deck. In terms of decks that'll actually see competitive success, I think Ulon is definitely going to be a great new archetype to play from Surging Sparks. And a lot of the lists from Japan doing well in City Leagues are playing this type of engine. Of course, Ulon does have that ability where when you evolve it from the Duraludon, you can put Metal Energy from the discard pile onto a Pokemon of your choice. You can use Ulon, whatever, to build up itself, and then it's got the attack, which for 3 Metal Energy does 220 damage, which of course does hit some pretty good numbers. Now, you might want to consider playing something like Vitality Band in the deck, or playing something like a Max Belt or Defiance Band to hit higher numbers, because you might want to be able to one-shot stuff like Raging Bolt. A really cool card within the deck is the Luxray. The Luxray is kind of interesting because basically if you have it in your opening hand, you can actually have it as your basic Pokemon, which is kind of cool. So if you start with a Duraludon and then you have a Luxray in your hand, you can instead use Luxray as your active Pokemon to start the game, which is actually really interesting. And then it does have an attack that can do 1 for 40 and then searches for any 2 cards out of your deck. And then, of course, the Relicanth is a very important resource to have in Ulon, because what you can do with Relicanth is the Duraludon's got that Rage attack that does 80 plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on it. So if the opponent does not one-hit KO the Ulon, you can use Relicanth to then copy Duraludon's Rage attack, and you can hit some pretty good numbers. If your opponent does like 200 damage to Ulon, you can just go Relicanth, Duraludon's attack for 280 damage, and just knock something out, which is really cool. And yeah, this deck definitely looks like it's going to be fun to play. Not only that, it is also going to be a decent archetype, I think, when it does release. I have been seeing the deck kind of evolve over time in Japan, so I'm sure that this list might be a bit outdated, but I do think Ulon definitely is something to consider if you're somebody who likes playing these like big, tanky, Stage 1 style decks. So it reminds me a lot of Duraludon VMAX. I'm so happy that my favorite Pokemon, Hydreigon, is finally getting an actual, like, good card, literally, like, 12 years later. Now, this card does have 2 very strong attacks, and this build here did do pretty good at a City League in Japan, and it is going to be revolving around using the energy requirements needed for Hydreigon's attack. So it is playing a heavy count of energy conservation cards that Hydreigon can use. Of course, we're trying to focus on that second attack that for 4 energy can do 130 damage to like 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. Literally, if you're playing against a big basic deck, you can win the game in like 2 attacks. Now, to power up Hydreigon, there is something like Neo Upper Energy, which can provide 2 of the energy. There's Counter Gain. If you're behind in prizes, you can use Counter Gain to then provide 1 less energy. So then that second attack only needs 3 energy. There's also Dark Patch. Hydreigon is a dark type Pokemon, so you can use Dark Patch to put a dark energy on it. Also, Crispin comes in handy as a way to get energy on Hydreigon too. Of course, if you're playing like a Stage 2 deck, you might as well play Pidgeot. Pidgeot will make it easier to pull off these different combos you're trying to make happen with Hydreigon, alongside having Rotom and Forest Seal Stone. And playing the Petron in the deck is interesting too. You can use it as a late game attacker, but you can also use Petron to give you a good time into like stall type decks, especially when you can use Hydreigon's first attack that does 200 damage and discards the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. I do think that first attack actually might end up being really, really good. Honestly, that first attack could just be better than the second attack in a lot of different scenarios, and that first attack could be very deadly. Like, I don't know if Hydreigon can lose to, like, Snorlax if you just sit there and spam that first attack and keep milling 3 cards with a Petron on the board. I'm really excited to try it out. And while its second attack does require a lot of energy, of course, this deck does have a lot of different ways to help cheat out that energy cost and build it up as fast as possible. I'm super excited to play this card, and I am definitely going to make a video on it when it drops. The new one-price Coffergrigus looks like it's going to be a great new spread deck combined with Coffergrigus EX and Dusknoir, of course, making for a pretty ghostly, spooky deck. Coffergrigus does have that attack, which for 1 Psychic Energy puts 6 damage counters on each Pokemon in play with an ability. Yes, that includes both you and your opponent, but that's fine. As long as you're not overbenching all your ability stuff, it's not that big of a deal. The big thing is you are going to be putting damage on your opponent's board. It puts 6 damage on too, so thankfully you do bypass Mana Fee and also the Terra effect on Terra Pokemon, which is quite nice. And of course, if you're using Coffergrigus' attack every single turn and putting all this damage on the board, you can combine this with some big blow-up turns with Dusknoir, where you can knock itself out, and then you can put 13 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Using this with all kinds of spread combos with Alakazam or Dusclops, or even the Coffergrigus EX, which is kind of a worse Dragapult. You know, for 2 Psychic, it does 110. You can put 5 damage counters on 1 or on your opponent's bench Pokemon anyway. Like, it is literally just a worse Dragapult EX, but it does have synergy with Coffergrigus and Dusknoir. This could be a pretty dirty spread deck, and I'm definitely excited to try out the new one-price Coffergrigus, because if your opponent plays into it, it's going to be very satisfying to put 6 damage counters and everything every single turn. This list here I got from Japan is playing 4 Night Stretchers, so you can bench Yamask, evolve into Coffergrigus, it gets knocked out, then of course you can Night Stretcher, get another Coffergrigus to evolve to the other Yamask, and then kind of rinse repeat that process. Then you can kind of come in with some Dusknoir combos, and then come in the late game maybe with a Coffergrigus EX and take a big knockout. Definitely going to be a really fun archetype to try out, and yeah, it's going to be fun to see more spread decks be good. Now, here's a really cool deck, and that's, of course, Alolan Exeggutor EX. Now, I did find this deck at a City League in Japan, and I think it's a really interesting archetype because it actually attacks with the Exeggutor. A lot of the Exeggutor ideas that I had floated around in my mind were pretty much just using it with Regidrago V-Star. Since this is a Dragon Pokemon, you can use it with Drago, but by itself, it actually isn't that bad. I mean, it's got 300 HP, which is already pretty good, as it is pretty tanky, and its first attack is really nice, too, because it's an energy acceleration attack, which, of course, for the 2 energy, you can do 150 damage and attach any number of energy or whatever from your hand, your Pokemon, any way you like. You can use the attack to actually power up stuff like the Milotic EX or the Gudra V-Star. Again, this list is from a City League in Japan. It's a very fascinating idea to attack with Exeggutor, but that doesn't mean you should sleep on Exeggutor's other attack, which that Swinging Fiend attack has an effect where you're probably going to take a knockout no matter what. You flip a coin if heads, you knock out your opponent's active basic Pokemon. If tails, you knock out one of their bench basic Pokemon. If you're playing against a big basic deck that has a bunch of 2-prizers on the board, if they're active the basic Pokemon, you're either going to knock out the active or the bench. Like against Raging Bolt, for example, like you should be able to just, win the game in like 3 attacks, which is kind of funny. So I think the second attack is also worth trying out too. But this build is looking pretty cool because, again, being able to accelerate all this energy into play with Exeggutor does give you some options to play some pretty unique cards. You have Gudra if you want to have a tank attacker. You can power Radiant Greninja even, and you can build up Milotic if you want to have a little bit of a wall Pokemon against those Terra decks. Something like a Charizard EX or a Dragapult might not appreciate having to face down a Milotic in this deck. So I think Exeggutor could be a pretty fun archetype. I can't wait to try this out, and I'm glad that somebody in Japan was able to make this really unique Exeggutor build actually work, because I think this card does have potential, not just as like a potential Regidrago partner. The new Scovillain EX has a really strong attack if you can put a bunch of damage counters on it. Of course, its ability does make it a dual type. It's going to be both a fire and a grass type with its ability, and then it's got that attack, which for 2 fire G does 10 plus 70 more damage for each damage counter on the Scovillain. So if you can put like 4 damage counters on Scovillain, it's going to do like 290 damage out of nowhere. Now, thankfully, there are some ways to get damage on it. There's Magma Basin, which does not only accelerate energy to the Scovillain to build it up, but it also puts 2 damage counters on it. The interesting part about this deck is using the Frostlass in deck. Frostlass has that passive ability where you can put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon in play with an ability, both yours and your opponent, except for any Frostlass. So you can use Frostlass to just damage your own Scovillains over time and just charge them up with damage. The other funny thing with Scovillain is that if your opponent doesn't one-hit KO it and they hit it really hard, well, you're probably just going to get absolutely blown up in return with that attack, being able to do 10 plus 70 damage. If, like, taking 200 damage is, like, ridiculous. That's, like, almost, like, that should be over 1,000 damage, which is just insanity. Some other interesting spread cards, we have the Damage Pump, which can move damage counters around with the Frostlass. If you have, like, a Mew or Pheasantipede in play, you can take some of the damage off them to put on your Scovillain to make it hit even harder. The Mela's nice, too, is another energy acceleration card. With the 4 Magma Basin, you should be able to easily build up the Scovillain, hopefully every single turn, as long as you're able to chain those cards all the time, especially if the Stadium Wars aren't as prevalent. There's another Stadium in the deck where if you attach it to I think it's a basic non-water Pokemon, it takes 2 damage counters, so that's another way to try to get damage counters on Scovillain. And why not even play Radiant Heatran in the deck too? It's another Pokemon that essentially has the exact same attack, doing 70 damage for each damage counter on the Heatran. If you can just sit there and load it up over time, Heatran can come in and also do a massive knockout, as it literally is like a one-prize version of Scovillain EX. I'm definitely excited to try out Scovillain, and hopefully we can have some pretty cool moments while I make a video on this card where we're able to do like a whopping amount of damage if this thing just takes a massive hit. Now, we're not done yet with the Archulodon decks. I want to look at an Archulodon Dialga V-Star deck. I know there's a lot of Dialga enjoyers out there, and this might be another really cool way to try out Dialga V-Star. So you can use Archulodon's ability instead of building itself up. Well, what if you were to use the ability to power up Dialga? It doesn't specifically say you can only attach energy to itself. You can build up any of your Pokemon. So you can use the Archulodon to build up the Dialga V-Star. And let's say, you go first, you attach the Dialga V, you get some energy in the discard pile. The second turn, you evolve into the Archulodon, and you put the 3 energy onto the Dialga, and then you attach again. And just like that, you have a turn 2 Star Chronos V-Star power. I think this build also did win a City League in Japan here that I got pulled out here, which is really cool. Also, Scramble Switch seems really good with Dialga V-Star. If you can load up the Dialga really quickly and get a second one in play, if the Dialga doesn't get KO'd, you can then Scramble Switch to a fresh Dialga V-Star and then have a new one attacking out of nowhere. So Scramble Switch seems like it's going to be a great Aspect card to play with Dialga. I think this is a really cool concept for Aradon, and I think there's a lot of potential to play this with the Dialga V-Star. It makes Dialga a lot stronger. I mean, you could maybe try to fit in Metang, but the deck only plays 9 Metal Energy. You're not really playing a lot of Metal Energy to begin with. Also playing the Judge. I mean, imagine just going turn 2 Judge, Star Chronos, cripple your opponent's entire setup, leaving them with like 4 cards in hand with no Pheasant play. That would be a little disgusting, I'm not going to lie. Also playing Pokemon Catcher to go after those, draw engines on the bench with the Dialga can also be pretty good. Still has the Relicanth in there because you can still attack with Archrolodon. You could still use it with that Duraludon to do a big amount of damage, which is really sick. The Turo's nice because you can Turo the Archrolodon to reuse it at some point, which is also good. You could even consider playing 2 Turos. I know a lot of the Archrolodon decks are playing Scoop Up Cyclone because you can, of course, pick it up and then reuse the ability to attach more energy, but Scramble Switch seems like it's probably a little bit more logical within this deck. And I don't know, if you can pull off turn 2 Star Chronos with this deck, I think this deck has some potential to be a pretty decent way to make Dialga good again. We finally have another playable hit and run deck with Flygon EX coming out. Now, Flygon EX does have a cool second attack, but I think the main attack we're going to focus on is going to be that hit and run attack, which one Fight and Energy does 130 damage, and then you switch Flygon with Pokemon on your bench. The idea behind this is, of course, you can switch into a wall Pokemon of your choice, and this deck does happen to play some pretty nice wall targets. The first one is Klefki, which can shut off basic Pokemon with abilities. Also, opening up with Klefki can be really good because you can actually slow your opponent down while you kind of buy time to set up your Stage 2 Flygon. Also, the Mimikyu, being an obvious wall Pokemon, being immune to Pokemon V is really strong. And then there's Cornerstone Ogerpon, which is a great inclusion in a deck like this when you're already using Fight and Energy for Flygon. Why not play the Ogerpon anyways? Not only is it a good target to switch into, but it can actually attack in the deck too, since you already have the Fight energy within the deck. Also, the Radiant Jirachi is kind of cute. If you switch into Jirachi and your opponent knocks it out, you can search check for any 3 cards you want and put them in your hand. Another interesting part about this list here that I got from Japan is that it is using Gastrodon. Now, Gastrodon does shut off Stage 2 abilities. This deck doesn't really have any Stage 2 abilities. I know there's a Flygon in there, but hey, Flygon, it doesn't got an ability. Who cares? So the Gastrodon can be a great way to slow the opponent down while you're throwing up a wall in their face using the old trusty Bibarel for the draw engine. It does have that Blood Moon in the deck for a late game attacker. This build almost got top 8 at a City League, and I've been seeing a couple of these like Flygon, Klefki, Gastrodon decks already doing decent in City Leagues. I'm definitely excited to try Flygon out. I know there could be ways to make that second attack work, especially if you were to combine it with, say, Palisand EX, but I definitely want to try out Flygon as a hit and run deck, because I think Flygon isn't that bad, and I do want to see if it can actually work with all these different wall Pokemon we have in the format. Okay, Slaking EX is going to be a monster of a new Stage 2 Pokemon coming out, but it is going to be nice because it does work pretty nicely with cards that Tarabgos already runs, especially the Fan Rotom, which can easily find you your Slack Off to help set your deck up pretty nicely. Slaking is a beast of a Stage 2, having 340 HP, but it does have an ability where it cannot attack if your opponent has no EXs or Vs in play. To be honest, though, that's fine because most decks in the meta right now use EXs and Vs, so it's not that big of a deal. Not to mention the deck has other attackers like Pidgeot EX and Tarabgos if you really have to. Slaking's big attack does 280 damage, and then you can discard energy from Slaking. That's fine. 280 damage is really good for 2 energy. Of course, you can build this up with Counter Gain if you want, so you can do 280 for 1 energy. There's Double Turbo if you want to just do 260. Of course, you can play Max Belt to do even more damage to make Slaking hit even higher numbers. Pairing with Pidgeot makes sense. If you're already playing Rotom in the deck, you can go Rotom for Slack Off, Pidgey to help set up your board, and then get Pidgeot down. I mean, then once you get Pidgeot out, you can easily, hopefully, chain attacks with the Slaking. You can even consider playing Slaking with, like, other energy Excel cards like Mellow, for example, to try to do 280 damage more consistently. The issue with playing Double Turbo is that it does reduce Slaking's damage output to 260, and that 280 damage is actually really relevant against stuff like Palkia and Regidrago and Lugia, so it might not be a bad idea to consider maybe playing ways to make Slaking attack for 2 energy as opposed to the Double Turbo. But again, with the Max Belt in the deck, maybe even considering playing Choice Belt or Defiance Band, you can make Slaking hit even harder. This list here I got did do decent at a City League in Japan, so it's a decent starting point. And again, I think there's a lot of support for Slaking. 340 HP is extremely tanky. It's got more HP than a Charizard EX, which is nuts. And that ability, honestly, might not even matter half the time as long as you're not playing against, like, I don't know, Ancient Box or United Wings. But even then, they might have a Fezandipity or Petron in play. Who knows? Okay, lastly, we have the new Ceruledge EX, which is going to be its own archetype when it releases. It does have that attack, which for 1 Fire Energy does 30 plus 20 more damage for each energy card in your discard pile. So basically, the gimmick of the deck is you just try to put as much energy in the discard pile as fast as you can. There are some cool ways you can get there through Radiant Greninja. There's Research, of course. Earthen Vessel to discard a card can be really good too, or just like over time, you'll just accumulate a lot of energy. In my opinion, the best way to play this deck is going to be through Palkia V-Star. This build here I got did win a City League in Japan, and Palkia V-Star I think is a great partner because while you might not be doing as much damage early on with your Ceruledge EX. You can kind of come in and use some big damage with Palkia V-Star while you put on a bit of pressure on your opponent's side of the board until you can kind of ramp up big damage in the late game. It's kind of like how you play Goldengo, where you use Goldengo with Palkia, use Palkia early on and then kind of clean up with Goldengo. This is kind of a similar concept. You can use Palkia early on and then kind of clean up with the Ceruledge EX once you've discarded a ton of energy. If you're already playing the Water Energy in the deck, you can use it with Greninja. You can attack with Greninja. Greninja is still a very valuable attacker right now, especially if nobody's playing Manaphy going forward. You do have the double Clone in the deck. Double Clone will be nice if you happen to hit something like a Milotic EX or a Mimikyu, obviously. And Ceruledge is definitely going to be very, very strong. There's a lot of other ways you could play it. I've seen it with Energy Search Pro, kind of like how Goldengo plays. I've seen it with just like straight Pokestops and stuff, and like Carmine Research, just go as fast as you can. Though I think the best way to play it is going to be with Palkia. I do like those other turbo-heavy builds, or even trying Ceruledge out with like Monkey Dory, just because you can play as much energy as you want. You don't have to play like a specific type of energy. You can play whatever energy types you want, so you can kind of get creative with how you want to build your Ceruledge EX deck. But I do really like the deck with Palkia V-Star, and I think Palkia is going to be the best way to play it. And this legit, like I said, could be its own meta deck when Ceruledge does releases. So definitely a card you want to keep your eye out on when it comes out in Surging Sparks. But there you go, folks. Those are 12 brand new decks from Surging Sparks. I'll leave a link to Limitless and Pokebook down below, the sites I used to get these deck lists for today's video. And I might have missed other cards, like I know Sylveon EX maybe, or something like the new Azumarill could have been included in this video. But if you want to go look at those two sites down below, you can definitely find more lists for those decks down there. But I just wanted to make it 12 for today's video. But I think these 12 decks are going to be a lot of fun to play, and I cannot wait for this new set to come out. I don't think the meta is going to get shaken up as much as I want it to be honest with you, but I am excited to play new decks regardless. There's a lot of fun new decks to come out of this set. If anything, at least there's going to be a lot of fun to be had with a new set, even if it doesn't make the meta completely shift. Though there might be some new ways to play different archetypes or new decks like Ceruledge and Aradon, which might pop up. I'm still excited to play with the new cards regardless, and I cannot wait to get my hands on Hydreigon EX. That's going to be a fun one. It's the mascot on the channel. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. If you're new to the channel, subscribe down below. Help me on the road to reaching 18K subs here on the second channel. And if you're going to get any Surging Sparks codes tomorrow on Pokemon TCG Live, get them at Card Cavern down below and use code LDF to get yourself a discount on your purchase. And I'll catch y'all later. Hope you enjoyed, and let me know what deck you're most excited for to play down in the comments below. And bye-bye.